Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the seminar. My name is Wayne Schultz. This is MAS90 year-end processing. Everything you need to know but may never have been told. Our session today is going to go for approximately an hour. It won't go any longer than an hour. We'll leave time at the end of the session for any questions. Typically, if you've been on our web seminars before, the way that we'll do it is we'll leave the time at the end for questions, and I try to get through as many questions as possible. However, since we have over 100 people with us here today, some of the questions do tend to get very specific about people's companies. So where you have a very specific question about something that's happening within your company, do not feel bad if I'm not able to get to it. I try to go through and get to the questions that I recognize as having been either asked the most often or as perhaps being the most applicable to everybody in the group. If you get a moment to familiarize yourself, if you've never been on one of these conference calls or one of these web seminars before, over to the right-hand side of your screen is your control panel. And this is going to control the way that you can ask questions during the session. If you have a question at any time, go ahead and on the lower right-hand corner of that little control panel where it says question and answer, you would just basically type it in there. That will send it over to me, and at certain points during the session I'll stop, I'll take a look at the questions, and as we're going through anything that looks like it would be of general interest to the group as a whole, I will go through and give you my best answer. If I don't know the answer, I tend to like to make the answer up so you can sort of guess whether I'm bluffing or not. Actually, I'm just kidding. If I don't know the answer, I will definitely tell you, and I can get back to you and let you know what that information should be. This is a free web seminar. This is the last free one we're holding for this year. Your phone is on listen-only mode. It's going to remain that way for the duration of the online seminar. That means that we're not going to have participants talking. The only way to communicate back is through that question and answer session in the lower right corner of your screen. At the end of the session, I have a complete PDF which contains everything that we're talking about here today. I will give you the email address. All you need to do is at the end of the session, send an email to that address. By return email, what will happen is you'll get back a copy of a PDF which contains all of the information that we're discussing, all of the frequently asked questions. So don't worry if you're doing a little extra Christmas shopping while you're sitting here looking at this web seminar, if you're not paying 100% attention. Of course, I would like everybody to sort of be completely focused and amazed by this truly amazing MAS90 information. But if during a certain period of time you happen to either have to go to the bathroom or something gets through you and you're not exactly paying 100% attention, these web seminar materials will be available afterwards. At the very end, I'll tell you the email address that you can send an email to, and I'll send you a PDF with all of the materials attached. I also have set up online, and I'll tell you the location at the end of the seminar, a location where you can go in and access all of the notes that we talk about today. This will be handy if you're sort of an entry-level person or you're just starting with MAS. I have all of the web links that we're going to go to. So don't panic if at some point you find that you're not able to follow along with how quickly I may be going from topic to topic. Question is the only audio available via long distance? Unfortunately, that is the only way that we're able to get in. That's the only way that the service that we use, they don't have an 800 number available, so I apologize in advance for that. What we will be looking at today is version 4.1 of Sage MAS90. Everything we talk about today is equally applicable to both Sage MAS90 and Sage MAS200. If you are on version 3.71, most of this is also applicable to you as well. There's certain things, and I will try to point them out, which are differences between version 4 and version 3.71. So if you're on an older version, don't worry, everything we talk about here concept-wise is going to be applicable to you. First thing I'm going to start off with, which can be confusing for people that have started just brand new with MAS, is the concept of an IRD. And what exactly is an IRD? An IRD is an interim release disc. And the interim release discs will be coming out shortly. They were actually scheduled to be out on December 19th. However, I do not see them yet posted online. They're interim release discs, meaning programming patches that Sage posts so that people who have not yet either upgraded to the very latest version, or if there's simply some new functionality, such as a new form layout for the 1099s or a new layout for the W-2s, you can just get that little specific piece of functionality and you don't have to go through a longer, more laborious upgrade. So the first thing that we'll talk about will be these interim release disks. The second thing that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about it really in passing because my advice to you is going to be that you really need to talk with your Sage business partner about whether you do this or not, are the service packs and the service updates. So as we get started, I want to sort of give you an overview of how we would go about applying, because there is going to be an interim release disk made available for Sage MAS90 towards the end of the year. And I just want to show you what I think is one of the more important skills to have in terms of being able to find information for Sage MAS90, and that's to navigate the online Sage website. And if we go through and if we look online, I'm going to take you through how you would actually go through and navigate and create an account quickly, and where you're going to find these IRDs or the interim release disks, and where you're going to find this backup material for the end of the year that Sage makes available for us. So the first thing that you're going to do in order to do that is I log on through Sage Software Online. So I go www.sagesoftwareonline.com. If you already have a username and a password, this would be a great place to enter it. If you don't have the username or password, there's an option right down here that says register now. What you would do is you would go in here and you would register for your username and password. In order to download interim release disks, service packs and service updates, and last but not least, tax table updates, you are going to need a login to the Sage Software Online. So this is where you go to do this. I'm going to assume that most people can navigate their way here and fill the information out. The only confusing piece of information that some people have questions about is, where do I find my account number for Sage? And typically, if you're on level 4, that will show on the home screen of MAS90, and I can show you quickly how to do that. Or you can look at an older packing list that you might have had when your upgrades came. They typically will list your account number right on the packing list. For now, let's log into the Sage Software Online. And let's take a look at exactly where we're going to go to download this information. When we log into the Sage Software Online, what we're going to do is come up to a screen where everyone's screen is going to look a little bit different depending upon the type of user that you are. If you're an end user, what you're going to see is less buttons. You're primarily going to see profile management and support. Resellers see a screen a little more detailed, which includes some information such as this. My step to go through and download my interim release disks and access all the other information is to click on this support tab. From within here, it brings me to a main page when I can go in and click on where it says Sage MAS90 and MAS200. On the left side of the screen, this brings me into my master support pages by product. The right side of the screen, if I'd clicked on something over to the right, that just brings me into a specific knowledge base. If I wanted to get in and research an error message or something similar to that. When I come into here, you'll see in the very upper left corner what I have is the place where I can go and take a look at the year-end processing information in the upper left corner. So when I go in and click on year-end processing, this will bring me in to where I can go through and download processing frequently asked questions, a number of different PDFs which have different procedures and things that I can do, frequently asked questions, that type of thing, by module. So if I have specific questions in a certain area, this is one great resource for me to be able to access online. Program updates that I need the most are over on the right hand side of the screen. What I have here is the interim release downloads are all available, as well as the tax table updates. So if for example, if I go into here and click, when they're made available, this is where you would come in to download your interim releases. And you would be able to take a look at the instructions, download the actual disk. This would actually come down, be downloaded to your computer, and then you could open it up and install it onto your system. Whoops, I went back one too many here. The other thing for those of you that are using Payroll, when they update the tax tables, this is where the tax tables are going to be found, right underneath the tax table updates. Right down here you'll see there's an option that says download the tax table updates. You'll be able to go into there and you'll be able to download any of the tax table updates. This little click here would allow you to download it and allow it to save it on your desktop. This is where you're going to get the tax table updates. The tax tables are no longer sent via CD to the individual users. The tax tables now all have to be downloaded individually off of the Sage Software online system. So this is important for a resource for you to be able to go in and get information on the latest breaking patches, the latest tax table updates, that type of stuff. The other thing that I think that I'm going to point out before I leave the Sage Software Online area that I believe is a great tool for almost everybody to use is a little feature called Sage Talk. And if you go back in through this area here, where the Sage MAS90 and MAS200. And if you scroll down on the right side of the screen, and again, I have links for all of this that I will send you, so don't worry if you're not following exactly where the link is going here. In the lower right corner of the screen, where it says Sage Talk Online, this is sort of your hidden resource for being able to go in and compare notes with other people to say, are you experiencing a certain issue with MAS90? Or I have this error message. Is anyone else experiencing a similar error message? Sage Talk is an open discussion forum. It's not regularly monitored by Sage, so it's primarily either user to user or it's user to reseller. There are many resellers who are extremely competent that patrol the forums and will answer questions and basically give out free advice. It's a way to share people to share experiences. The way that I use the forum the most is to go in and use it as sort of an early warning sign to say, is somebody else having a problem with MAS90 that might have just occurred? For example, if the tax tables just came out, is somebody else having an issue and are they reporting it? So that's Sage Talk. That's a separate area of the Sage Online Forum. If you register for a username, you'll have access to this site. I would highly recommend it. I think it becomes a great tool, especially during the year-end time, It's a great tool for anyone who is still on Sage Basic Maintenance, which is a requirement to access all these online resources, but may not be active with a Sage Business Partner or may not want to be paying a Sage Business Partner. Okay, I'm going to close down here this site, and let me just see whether we have any questions on the forum. Oh, somebody is asking, what is your name on Sage Talk? My user ID is MAS90 Guru, MAS90 GURU. So if you want to go through and take a look at different posts that I might make on there. Let me close down this session, and let's get back to the MAS90 portion where we'll actually talk about some of the year-end tips and tricks that I've gathered throughout the years. The first thing that I want to talk about with respect to closing the year in MAS90 is, what does some of the seasoned veterans do that have been using MAS90 for years? What are some of their steps that they might take that it would take you a few years to catch on to say, oh yeah, that maybe seems like a good idea. Maybe that's something that I should do for my company as well. The most powerful thing that I've seen people do is they make a backup of their MAS90 data right through the MAS90 system itself. What you may not know is there's a built-in utility for MAS90 to create its own carbon copies of the company data files. So people at the end of the year, before they go through and close the system, will access this utility and create a carbon copy of their data files. And it's useful for several reasons. It's useful for payroll, first of all, because people will make carbon copies of their payroll files so that during the year, if they have any employees that come back to them and say, for example, that they lost their W-2s, they can flip over into this backup company file and reprint it from there. And the backup companies are also very useful if you're trying out a new function that you're not familiar with, or if you're doing something else that's invasive, such as renumbering accounts or doing other things that might go through and make a lot of changes to your software. I'm going to show you in version 4 how you can go about making these backup companies before you go and close your year. And it's really quite simple to do. It all happens off of the Library Master menu. And you just need to select from the main menu the company maintenance. And double click on company maintenance. And this will bring up your company maintenance window. What you want to do in this window is you want to put in the company that you want to move the data into. So this screen is to create your new company that it's going to go into. Let me just, for example, call this Y06. Let me pretend I'm going to put in my fiscal year 06 data into this new company. From there, what I can do is click on the button that says copy. And it's going to ask me, what company code do you want to copy from? And let me just say that I want to copy from my ABC company. This populates all the information, and it allows me to go through and make a carbon copy of my ABC company. It's going to go through and take everything in ABC and put it into this Y06 company. So when I hit proceed, it's going to automatically, it'll prompt me and say, do you want to copy all the data to this new company? When I say yes, that will go through and copy all the information into the new company. Now I have a safety. If something happens during my month-end or year-end processing, I have a way to go back. I have a Y06 company that's a mirror image of the data that's in my live company. Now, a lot of you may ask, well, why can't I just rely on my nightly backups from our IT people? And the simple answer is you can, and you should. But this is an extra step that the people that are real veterans with MAS90 have taken, because A, it doesn't rely on the IT folks being around to be able to make an extra backup for you in the middle of the day. A lot of times they don't want to do that because you have other people on the network, And if you ever need to restore data or look it up, you don't have to go hunt down for your IT folks to be able to restore the data. It's all right here within MAS90. Super powerful utility. This happens in level 4, right underneath the company maintenance, and you can go through and select it, and it will allow you to copy that. If you're on version 3.7.1, I'm not going to demonstrate the 3.7.1 method, although I will give you a link to see it. If you're on 3.7.1 version of MAS90 or MAS200, the option would just be to do File, Run, and then you type in the hidden command SV Data. So when you copy in File, Run in SV Data, that will allow you to go through. It pops up a hidden dialog box, which is only used under version 3.7.1 to do this copy function within MAS90. The next important topic for anyone who has never gone through a year-end with MAS90 and who is using Payroll is the subject of when do you print your W-2s and how do you manage the whole updating of the tax tables. I'm going to touch on this briefly now in a little bit more depth when we get over to the Payroll. If you're using Payroll and you're printing W-2 forms, the important thing to remember for now, until we talk about it in a little more detail, is do not load the new tax tables until you've already printed your W-2s for the prior year. Because you'll find if you ignore this advice that the new FICA limits for the new year tables are going to interfere with the W-2 printing. Because the way that the MAS90 goes through and prints its W-2s is anybody who's over the FICA limit, it just looks into the current year's tax tables. And it says, what's my FICA maximum for this year? And if I'm over the FICA maximum, what it prints on the W-2 is my FICA wages. It's going to be whatever the FICA maximum is from the tax table. And a hidden gotcha of this whole thing, some people in the past have said, I'll just work around it. I won't change the FICA maximum for one of my companies. I'll just change it for another company. Well, the hidden gotcha with MAS90 with Payroll is these tax tables are all shared. So it's shared tax tables amongst all the companies. So once the FICA max changes for one company, it changes for everybody. So that's a hidden gotcha. We're going to talk about that in more depth, but it's just something to remember now. People that are used to going through and working with MAS90 know well that you need to print your W-2s before you load that new tax update onto the system. Otherwise, you can get misleading information. Another question that comes up quite a bit, and this is in the materials that I will send to you, so don't worry about making notes or that you have to copy this all down exactly. The order of closing the modules in MAS90. General rule of thumb is you go from the modules that produce data down to the modules that capture data. So after I make my backup, I would start with, for example, my bill of materials, which doesn't capture any data, only generates data and passes it to other modules, and work my way down the list until I finally get to the general ledger. And at that point, I just go through and close those modules in that order. I have been doing MAS90 since 1986. I have never seen anyone get in serious trouble because one module was closed a day before the other module. I have seen people get into more serious trouble doing things which would seem more innocent. The biggest of which would be that W-2 issue we just spoke about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when you do 1099 processing in a minute as well. Somebody has a question, when is the best time to run tax tables if we do not print W-2s until the end of January? I will cover that in a couple minutes when we get to the payroll. That's a great question. Nearly everybody has that question, and I'm going to show you how to work around that. Other questions that will come up and that people who've worked with MAS for quite some time will know is what exactly can be opened and what can't be reopened. For example, once I go through and close a certain module, can I reopen it? Or am I stuck? What happens if I close my general ledger and my accountant comes in and says, here, post these entries into 2006, but I'm already in 2007? Is there a way to do that? And the long and short answer is I can reopen the general ledger if I know how, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. Everything else, typically I would not post an entry to a prior period. So that would mean payables, receivables, I would post it currently, or sometimes, depending upon the situation, up to 1 month ahead of time. But I would not go through and post anything to an earlier time period except for in the general ledger. It's worth noting that payroll always closes on a calendar year. You cannot reopen the payroll and go back and reissue a paycheck once you've closed payroll. You have to deal with it all going forward. It has to be on a calendar year. It's not a fiscal year or any other type of year that you go through and manage the payroll. Once it's closed, which is another reason why people go through and they make these backup companies to store their data and be able to go back and access the information after it's been closed out. Let's take a little look now at some of the modules as we go through and some of the detailed feedback that I would give you about things that you need to look for as you're going through and closing the modules. Let's start with General Ledger. Before I start, the first thing I would have done is I would have made a good backup of all my data before I went through and did anything that was going to be closing out the system. When I start with General Ledger, here's how I will do it with a client. The first thing I will review, whether it's a new client or an existing client, will be under the Setup menu for General Ledger and underneath the General Ledger options. And what I'm looking to get at in here is when I open up General Ledger options, there's three things that I'm looking at and I'm looking for. The first thing that I'm looking for is on the very first page in the lower right corner. I want to know right here that the number of years that I'm going to retain my General Ledger history meshes with what I want to use. So for example, if I'm okay with only keeping 2 years of General Ledger history, you can keep that set on your machine. But once you go and close General Ledger as part of the year-end closing process, the system looks in and says, how many years did you tell me to keep history for? And if I have more than 2 years of history, guess what happens to those other years of history? They're gone. They get cleared out. I will almost always go through on a system and recommend to a client that they keep the maximum that you can keep in here, which is 99 years of history. The reason being is there's utilities that are built in so that you can go in and get the history back. I'm sorry, I'm backwards. There's utilities that are built in so that you can go in and purge the history. But there's no utility for you to go in and get history that you've cleared out and bring it back into your system. So this is the first thing that if I was closing out the General Ledger that I would look at. The second thing that I would look at would be on the second tab. And there's an option right down here, these two options, which would ask me whether I want to reset the journal numbers and the registered numbers at year end. Some people do not like to have their registers start to duplicate. So there's an option in here that says, no, don't reset them. I just want to keep them at whatever the register number is. I want it to keep running consecutively. That's up to you how you want to do it. I've seen it all different ways. Some people feel like those numbers should never repeat. Other people leave it at reset it during year end. I believe the default on this is to reset it at year end. And then finally, the last section that I would look at in here is this little doodad right down on the bottom of the screen. And that's what's asking me when I go through and close the year, do I want to copy my actuals into my budgets? This is okay as long as you haven't spent a lot of time designing your budgets for the new year going forward. I've had clients spend a lot of time go through, make up their budgets, they go through and close the year. Unbeknownst to them, this option is checked. All of those budgets get wiped out. That's a really unhappy telephone call for me to receive, and it's very tough to go back and to fix that, short of going through and restoring some data files and hoping that you have those extra data files laying around. So those are the three things that I would check before I went through and closed the year. They'll keep you out of trouble in most instances. Now, the standard reports that I would run from within the general ledger in MAS90, there's no penalty for running too many reports. So what I'm going to tell you is just the standard minimum reports I run. If you run more reports, that's great and that's fine. There's no rationale that says you have to run more or less. Just over the history and when I used to go through and work as a CPA and work on the books and records of my clients, I would look to make sure that they had these three separate reports. The first one would be the General Ledger Trial Balance Report. I run that as of December 31st. The second one would be the financial statements. I would go through and run my set of financial statements as of the end of the year so that I'd have a copy and I can make one nice neat package. And the last report that I would run and make sure that all my clients had is the General Ledger Detail Report. And I would always tell them, and I still tell them today, run this General Ledger Detail Report for your full year. Even if every month you're going through and running a General Ledger Detail Report, which I think is a good idea just for the month as part of your monthly close, at the end of the year, when you go through and run this General Ledger Detail Report, run it for a full year. And the reason being is simple. First, it gives me a complete list of all my transactions for the year. So I don't have to worry if something happens to my system. I have a complete list of everything. Better than that though, at the end of the year when my CPA comes in and they're looking for all my books and records, I have one stack of material to give to them and say, here, take this information, go in the conference room, have a field day. We're not going back and forth constantly to say, okay, here's January, here's February, here's March. I have one nice neat stack of information. For those of you who have just upgraded to version 4, I'm going to show you in the General Ledger Detail Report a trick that you need to know about in order to get off a General Ledger Detail Report that looks like what you're used to getting in earlier versions of MAS. I've modified my report using some saved report settings. However, out of the box, the MAS90 system General Ledger Detail Report doesn't check off this option down here in the corner. It does not go through and say, print this report in a condensed format. And what happens is if you don't check this box off, you get this report that's about 4 times longer than you ever used to seeing. It uses, of course, 4 times more paper. Nobody is happy. And the whole answer to this is you just go in here and check the box off where it says print condensed. Now the question that comes up next 100% of the time is, well, how do I make that stick? It's easy within the new MAS90. All you have to do is under the version 4.0 modules, go up and you can save it. You do save as, and the new MAS90 has saved report settings. So you can actually go up into here, give it a new name. Let me just call it condensed. And I can call it General Ledger Report Condensed. And if I kick it off here where it says default report and save it, every time I come into this, that little box will be checked. You typically want to have this box checked. We've had nothing but complaints from people to say, geez, we really wish that we would have less paper. This is one way to go through and do this. Another little tip for those of you going through at the end of the year that might want to do some analysis if you have not yet looked fully at the version 4. If I go through here and if I preview my General Ledger Detail Report on the modules that are at the 4.0 standards, now I don't have a great deal of detail on this particular report. However, for yours it likely would be different and you would have more information. On the modules that are at the 4.0 standards, you have the ability to export this to Excel now. Other earlier versions of MAS didn't have this. It's done with this little icon in the upper left corner. It says Export Report. Click here, and you're going to get the export report. You're going to be able to send it off to Excel, any data format, almost any data format that you want. Super powerful. Have had a lot of clients ask, how do I get this information out to Excel? Here you go. This is the way you do it through any of the version 4.0 standard modules. It's just preview the report in the upper left corner. Click on the little picture of the envelope, which stands for export. That will allow you to export the data. You used to be able to also do some of this in the version 3 of MAS. Version 3 of MAS does support, in the general ledger module, exporting to file formats. That's all done through printer setup in version 3. However, it doesn't support as many file formats, you can see, as version 4 does. Version 4 has a whole pull-down list of different formats, and any of the modules that have been updated to those standards have that available. Question now comes up, probably the top question that anybody has asked in the whole history of lifetime of MAS90 since it was ever invented, and since anybody has ever started using MAS90 is, my CPA came in, I already closed the year, how do I go back and reopen my general ledger? Because the CPA insists that I want to go through and make some entries into a closed year. It's simple to do once you know the secret. Let me tell you, the overall issue with the MAS90 general ledger is it wants to protect you from going backwards in making entries to what it considers to be a closed period. It's not because technically it doesn't know how to do that. It prevents you from going backwards so that you won't mess up any financial statements that you might have already distributed. However, if you know what you're doing in version 4, posting to a closed period is as easy as going into general ledger, go to the setup menu, select general ledger options, and from within the general ledger options, all you'll need to do, like if I had already closed this out, I would be in 2011 period 1. So when I came into here, it would show me I'm in 2011, I'm in period 1. All I need to do to reopen a period is use this right here. Go in and do 2010, put it back in period 12, click on the accept button, and I'm in business. MAS90 will now allow me to go in and make a posting to that period without squawking. Now the next question is, okay, I made that entry into that period. Wayne, what do I have to do? Do I have to close out the year again, or does MAS90 get screwed up? Does it impact retained earnings? General rule of thumb, version 3 of MAS90, you do close the year again. It does not hurt anything in the system. I've been consulting on MAS since '86. I have never had a client hurt themselves by going through and closing the year again, with the only exception being if they had, say, not retained enough history or something like that, if they hadn't thought to think of that, to check it. In version 4, you do not need to go through and reperform a close. They have automatically redesigned that. You can go back into general ledger options and just change your year back to where it should be, and you can go along your merry way. I do not believe that if you go through and do the close again in version 4 that you will cause yourself any irreparable damage. However, that's one of the features that they have designed in the new version 4. A couple other things that can come up during year end. For different reasons, I have seen clients where suddenly the balance looked like they were a little wrong, and they wanted to say, is there any way for me to go in and recompute those balances? On the general ledger, you can go in and recalculate account balances. It's under general ledger, utilities, and recalculate account balances. I have not seen this cause irreparable harm to anybody, although it's still a relatively new utility. Under version 3 of MAS90, so if you're on an older version of MAS, the same recalculation was done under setup. Under fiscal year maintenance, there's a button in there So long as you're a user with supervisor rights, you can go in there and click on the button and it will tell you that you can recalculate your balances. This is typically if a balance doesn't look right. If something looks like it's out of balance on my trial balance, on my general ledger for some reason, I would use this procedure before I would try to make a one-sided adjusting journal entry. We have a couple questions. Just let me look and see whether there's anything that I can go through and answer. Somebody's asking a long one about how many company copies do you make? You need to make a copy before you close payroll, but before the new payroll. But AR and AP don't close until the 15th. Most of the companies that I consult with, they're certain to make a copy for the payroll, and then they usually don't make another copy of the company until they're closing the entire system. So until they're closing AR or until they're closing AP. Somebody asked the question about opening the GL after you've closed the year. I think that we went through and answered that. So let's go back and go on to our next module. This one that I want to talk about, the next one, is going to be payroll. And we already talked a little bit about some of the things that are in here. Payroll is tricky because you have to close it before you start the new year. There's no grace period. Once you come to your last payroll in the year, before you can cut another payroll check, you must close out payroll. So this is, again, the reason that people use these test companies or these separate companies that they set up so that they can retain a copy of the payroll. We've talked about that the tax tables are system-wide. They're shared by every single company in MAS90. If you're going to do electronic filing in MAS, you need to file for a PIN number. Electronic filing. I'm not trying to give you tax advice, but I believe it applies to those who have over 250 employees. Consult your CPA to see whether you're subject to that. I have links in the materials that I'm going to send you, which will allow you to go online to the IRS and review their materials. We talked at the very beginning of the session about interim release disks. And interim release disks would now be applicable for payroll, because if there's a change to either the W-2 form or the 1099s, you usually would want to have your interim release disk installed before you go through to print any of your forms. So before you go through and print your forms, you're going to want to download those interim release disks. Again, I have links to them. We talked about obtaining those directly online from Sage Software. And again, do not load the tax tables until you've printed the W-2s. The tax tables, we looked at where we would download those. Those are self-installing programs. So once you download the IRDs or the tax tables, they will install directly to your MAS90 system. The most difficult question that they might ask during the installation is, where is your MAS90 installed? And the neat trick that I have always used, and just about everybody else who's pretty heavily into MAS90, is if you use the file run command and you type in *info, this will show you a picture of where your MAS90 is installed. It comes back and it says, here's the data path that your MAS90 is loaded to, right here. Typically, when you specify where you're going to install these programs, you have to specify everything but the final MAS90 part of the path. This is where you find out if you do not know where your MAS90 is loaded. You do file, run, and then *info will get you into there to see that. Payroll, another trick workaround. People will ask questions about, okay, I need to load my tax tables because I'm going to do my first payroll run of the year before I'm going to be able to print my W-2s. So how do I handle that? The simple way that people have worked it out is, first, of course, they make that backup company, and secondly, they do go ahead and load their tax tables. But before they go through and print their W-2s, what they would do is they would have made a note. They would go into tax table maintenance and open up the tax table maintenance. It'll ask you what state that you're using. And when I type in here the word Fed, that will show me all of my FICA limits right here. These are the two numbers that you jot down before you install your tax tables, because before you install the new updated tables, go in and take a peek and see what the old limits were. Install your tables, process normally for the new year. When you're ready to do your W-2s, go back into here under the tax table maintenance. Jot down the figures that are in there, because those are the updated ones after you did the W-2, the tax table updates. Take those figures out, put in last year's figures right into here where you see highlighted. Save it. Go to your test company. From within your test company, go through and print your W-2s. The wages for the FICA will all come out proper so long as you set the limit back to what they were for the prior year. W-2s are all printed out. Take them out. You're happy with them. Everything works. Come back in here to this tax table maintenance and swap back the FICA limits. Now you're back in business. Quick aside about the W-2 printing, MAS90 does not print the W-3. It also does not print the 1096. Those are a couple questions that people have asked as well. There's a whole slew of questions that people will have about how do I get my W-2s to line up? Is there a special way so that they line up onto the system? The materials that I'll send you will have some information on how to go through and get your W-2s lined up. In general, you want to make sure that you print directly to the printer. Don't preview the W-2s and then print from preview. Print them directly to the printer. The form codes are almost universally, or they're universally government forms, so there's no difference between what you could buy at Office Depot and what you might buy through the mail. Let's see if we have any specific questions on payroll. Yeah, can you run your W-2s from the MAS90 backup at year end? Yes, I think we talked about that. How do you get the 1099 information? I'm going to go and show you how to do that right now, how to get the 1099. So if we have other questions, I'll grab them towards the end. I just don't want to run out of time before we get a chance to look at the 1099 info. 1099 information happens right through accounts payable. And again, there's some things that I would review within accounts payable as well. Right in on the accounts payable options, there's just two areas that I basically review. I would check and make sure that the number of days to retain paid invoices is set to the maximum. I happen to like to set it to the max. And the number of months to retain check history is set to the maximum. You can always purge it out. You can't make it come back. That's my theory on life. Okay, so these are two things that I would check specifically before I went through and did the year end. I would make sure that I had any interim release disks loaded in the system. And then the trick to printing 1099s, there's actually a couple tricks. It's off of the reports menu. So it's different than where you might expect to see it. It's not on a period end menu or anything like that. It's off of reports, off of Form 1099 printing. And when you go into here, here's a couple areas that people typically have gotten tripped up on. It will ask you over here, 1099 form to print. First mistake people will make is they're using a laser printer, and instead of selecting 1099 laser, they'll select something like 1099 MIS, which I believe is formatted to go to a dot matrix printer. So if you're printing to a laser printer, you want to select the laser miscellaneous forms. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare to go through and get them to align. Also, similar to W-2s, print these direct to the printer. When I say print direct to the printer, I mean by going through and clicking on the print button down there. Do not go through and click on preview, look at them on the screen, say, oh geez, these look great, I'm ready to print them, and then click printer. You want to go through and print it directly when you're finally ready to go. There's a final step after you print the 1099s, and that would be you're going to get a pop-up list that's going to say, do you want to clear the 1099 information? After you've printed your 1099s, you have to answer yes to the prompt. Do you want to clear the 1099 information? Do not just leave them there and forget about them for the year, because the way that accounts payable works is it will track one current year of 1099 information and 1 year into the future. And I've had clients where they haven't gone through and closed out their 1099 year for 3 or 4 years, and they've never printed 1099s. It hasn't been important for them. And then ultimately 1 year they come forward and somebody gets interested in printing 1099s, but lo and behold, because they have not been closing out the 1099s through the screen, all of their information is inaccurate. Question comes up, is there any way around that? Is there any way, if I have not paid attention to my 1099s, to get that information out at the end of the year? And the only way that I have really done it is to go in and design crystal reports to read the history files. And I have been able to read into some of, say, the check history files and get information out for clients that way. But otherwise, there's not a way to go through and rebuild any of those totals if you haven't gone through and done that, that close at the end of the year. Finally, because we're starting to run a little bit short on time, the accounts receivable is the last module that I'm going to touch on. And this one, similar to, apologize for jumping around here, similar to the other modules, I would check underneath the accounts receivable options for 3 different things. And it's basically history retention, and under the accounts receivable options, it will ask me, oops, oh, maybe it would be under history. Yeah, number of years to retain customer history, number of years to retain salesperson history, number of years to retain cash receipts. Basically what I do is I go through each of these tabs and I look for anything that says, how long do you want to retain history before I close? And I set it to the maximum. Some people disagree with that. Some people say, I don't care, I don't need to have all that history. And that's fine. There's nothing that says that you have to have it. As a consultant, I tend to protect myself for the eventualities, and I tend to like to say most of my clients want to see more history rather than less, so I would tend to err on the side of caution and make sure that people were set up to retain this information. However, it's not wrong if you say, I only want to keep a year, I never look back at it. There's no problem with you saying, I want to keep less history rather than more. No problem whatsoever. Again, I didn't go into the mechanics of how you physically close each of these modules because it's pretty straightforward. For each of the modules, there's just an option that says period end, and you're going to select period end processing off of each of the individual modules. There's really not a lot of magic to it. You know, you'll print the standard reports for most of my clients. That's the same reports that they're printing on a monthly basis. At the end of the year, they're printing a little more detail for the general ledger, especially the general ledger detail report. However, if everything has been balancing as you go along month to month, I find the vast majority of my clients don't have any issues when they come through and go through to close. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Again, copies of the material, the supporting copies of the material are all available. Just send a blank email over to this address. You can access all the notes online. Have a great holiday, and I'll talk with you all in 2007. Thanks.